She had never expected a single sentence to change the rhythm of her day so abruptly. One moment, the room was filled with ordinary chatter and laughter, and the next, it felt like the air itself had shifted. Amelia froze mid-step, her hand hovering over the coffee cup she had been about to pick up. It was a casual Tuesday evening, the kind where shadows stretched long across the living room floor and the hum of the refrigerator seemed louder than usual. Her cousin, Jordan, leaned against the doorway, grinning like he knew something she didn't. And then, without warning, he made the comment. "I always thought you'd be more spontaneous, Amelia," he said, eyes glinting in a way that made her heart stutter. Not in a romantic sense, never that, but in a way that suggested he had glimpsed something about her she hadn't noticed herself. She blinked. A laugh, nervous and unsure, escaped before she could catch it. I'm pretty spontaneous," she replied, but her voice sounded smaller than she intended. The warmth of the room seemed to condense around them, almost pressing in, and she felt an odd mixture of curiosity and hesitation. Jordan shrugged as if dismissing it, but the sparkle in his eyes lingered. Amelia forced herself to sip the coffee, hoping the ritual would steady her thoughts. But every time she looked up, he was still watching, and every time their eyes met, something unspoken hung in the air. Her mind replayed his words over and over. Spontaneous. She had never thought of herself that way, not in the serious, calculated routines she followed. Yet, Jordan's comment had ignited a subtle spark of reflection she couldn't ignore. Later, Amelia wandered into the kitchen, the silence stretching longer than she liked. She leaned against the counter, tracing her fingers along the polished wood, and tried to rationalize the flutter in her chest. She told herself it was nothing, just a comment, nothing more, but deep down, she knew that even small remarks had the power to echo louder than we imagine. Across the room, Jordan busied himself with a stack of magazines, but she could feel his gaze flicking toward her whenever he thought she wasn't looking. The weight of it was strange, almost tangible, like the room had grown smaller and tighter, concentrating everything into a tension she couldn't name. Amelia caught herself smiling, though she tried to hide it. It wasn't embarrassment, exactly. It was the unexpected thrill of being seen differently, even just for a moment. How could one careless sentence create such a ripple? She glanced out the window, watching the first stars blink awake against the dark velvet sky, thinking that the world outside seemed calmer, quieter, almost contemplative. Her thoughts wandered to memories of their childhood days spent climbing trees, secrets whispered under the old oak in the backyard, laughter echoing down the street. Jordan had always been there, a constant yet comfortable presence, someone who never forced her to explain herself. And yet, tonight, he had shifted the air without meaning to, simply with words. A sudden noise startled her. The sound of a chair scraping the floor pulled her back to the present. Jordan was leaning closer, holding a photo album he had found tucked behind the couch cushions. He smiled gently, a softness in his expression that caught her off guard. "You never let me see this side of you," he said quietly, handing her the album. "I don't know why I never noticed it before." Amelia opened it slowly, the pages revealing images of family gatherings, past vacations, and silly, unguarded moments. Each photo was a fragment of a life she hadn't realized she wanted to share so openly. And in that silent exchange, the earlier comment settled deeper, wrapping around her thoughts like a warm, persistent breeze. If you're enjoying this story so far, please like the video and subscribe for more heartfelt tales. She looked up at him, unsure why her chest felt tight, unsure why the air seemed so heavy, yet inviting. The room that had been ordinary only minutes ago now held an unspoken question, lingering between them, delicate and fragile. Amelia closed the album, her fingers brushing against his hand for the briefest moment before she pulled away. Words seemed inadequate, unnecessary, yet the tension hummed in the silence. She wondered if he felt it too. And then, Jordan said something that made her pause in an unexpected way, a question so casual in tone, yet loaded with implications she couldn't quite place. Her lips parted, but no sound came, and she realized with a quiet shock that nothing would feel the same between them again. The night had settled into a soft, comfortable darkness, the kind that made the familiar feel unfamiliar. Amelia sat cross-legged on the couch, still holding the photo album, but her attention had shifted entirely to Jordan. He was perched on the edge of the armchair, flipping through a magazine without really seeing it, and the quiet between them felt heavy yet tender. Her mind kept replaying the question he had asked, the one that had left her frozen. It wasn't intrusive, not at all, but it had carried an unexpected weight, like a pebble dropped into still water. Each ripple extended further than she thought possible, touching corners of her thoughts she hadn't even realized existed. "You've changed a little, haven't you?" he asked again, softer this time, as if testing the waters. Amelia looked down at her hands, fidgeting with the edge of the album. "Maybe," she murmured, unsure if she was referring to herself or the moment itself. The room felt charged, though no one said anything directly about it. Jordan tilted his head, a curious smile tugging at the corner of his lips. Not in a bad way. Just different. The simplicity of his words unsettled her more than a complex accusation ever could. Different. She thought about the routines she clung to, the plans meticulously laid out for weeks, even months. And suddenly, she wondered if perhaps she had been missing something, moments of ease, of laughter, of life lived spontaneously. Amelia set the album aside and leaned back into the couch cushions. Outside, the wind rustled the leaves, a soft accompaniment to the quiet tension in the room. She tried to speak but only managed a soft laugh, the kind that carries both nervousness and curiosity. Jordan chuckled too, though it sounded almost surprised at the sound. It was the kind of laughter that filled spaces without words, and Amelia felt herself relax just slightly. Yet, beneath it all, an invisible thread seemed to tie them together, taut and unyielding. "I didn't mean to make it awkward," he said suddenly, eyes meeting hers. "I just noticed something. And I thought you should know." She hesitated, her mind racing through 1,000 interpretations of that simple sentence. Noticed something. About her. About the way she moved, the way she smiled, the way she carried herself through life with quiet strength. And for the first time, Amelia felt exposed in a way that was both unsettling and strangely comforting. "I know," she whispered finally, her voice barely audible. "It's just surprising. That's all." He nodded, leaning back slightly, and for a few moments, neither spoke. The air felt different now, not uncomfortable, not strained, but alive. Every glance, every subtle gesture carried meaning, though unspoken, and Amelia realized that the world outside this small living room had never seemed so distant. Then, without warning, Jordan reached for a pen and began jotting something on a scrap of paper. Curious, Amelia leaned closer. He tore the note in half and handed her one piece. Written in his neat, careful handwriting were just a few words: "Trust yourself more." She stared at the note, heart pounding, wondering how a simple statement could carry such weight. Trust herself. In all the years she had known him, Jordan had never handed her advice like this. And yet, the words resonated, echoing in a part of her she rarely acknowledged. Amelia folded the paper slowly, feeling its presence like a small, tangible pulse against her palm. She looked up to find him watching her, a faint smile playing at his lips, almost like he was waiting to see if the words had landed as he hoped. For the first time that evening, she felt a spark of clarity in the midst of the confusion. Maybe it wasn't just his comment, not just his question, or even the note itself. Maybe it was the way he looked at her, the way he noticed the little things, the way he didn't expect her to be anyone other than herself. Her thoughts were interrupted by the creak of the floor outside the living room. The house felt larger suddenly, the quiet stretching long and intimate. Amelia realized she was holding her breath, waiting, not for anyone else, but for what she couldn't yet name: a shift, a movement, a recognition that something subtle had changed between them. Jordan leaned back, hands resting loosely on his knees, and she couldn't help but notice the gentle seriousness in his expression. He wasn't trying to manipulate the moment. He wasn't trying to provoke her. He was simply present, in a way that made her heart notice itself. Amelia swallowed, feeling an unfamiliar tightness in her chest. The night had deepened, the shadows more pronounced, yet within them, a quiet warmth spread. She realized that even ordinary evenings could hold extraordinary shifts, if one simply paid attention. And just as she opened her mouth to say something, anything, there was a soft knock at the door, faint but deliberate. Both of them paused, the small interruption slicing through the tension, leaving a flutter of curiosity and uncertainty in its wake. Amelia's hand hovered near the doorknob, her pulse quickening in a way that made her feel strangely aware of every small sound around her. The knock had been soft, yet deliberate, and it carried a weight that made the air in the room feel heavier. She glanced at Jordan, who was leaning slightly forward in his chair, brows drawn together in the faintest hint of curiosity. "I'll get it," she said, her voice steadier than she felt. As she opened the door, a cold breeze slipped inside, carrying the faint scent of winter air. A neighbor, Mrs. Thompson, stood on the porch with a small package cradled in her arms. "Evening, Amelia. Thought you might like this," she said kindly, her smile gentle but knowing. Amelia accepted the package with a small nod, the paper crinkling slightly under her fingers. "Thank you, Mrs. Thompson," she replied. Once the door closed, she turned to find Jordan watching her, his expression unreadable. There was something in his gaze that suggested he noticed more than just the exchange of pleasantries. Curiosity mingled with hesitation as Amelia untied the ribbon around the package. Inside lay a small journal, leather-bound and soft, the pages untouched. She ran her fingers across the cover, feeling a shiver of anticipation. She had never been much for keeping journals, but something about the moment felt significant, as if it were meant to be more than just a gift. Jordan leaned against the doorway, arms crossed loosely. "Looks important," he remarked lightly, though his eyes lingered on her in a way that made her pause. She realized again that small gestures from him carried an unusual weight, one that made ordinary moments feel remarkable. Amelia set the journal on the coffee table, running her hands over the smooth leather before opening it. The first page held a note in elegant handwriting: "May this help you capture the moments that matter most, even the ones you didn't see coming." Her heart caught in her chest. It wasn't just a journal. It was a reminder, subtle, yet profound, that life often held unexpected shifts. And somehow, Jordan's earlier comment, the note he had given her, and this gift now all felt connected, like threads weaving a pattern she hadn't anticipated. She glanced up at him, unsure if she should speak, unsure if words were necessary. Jordan's gaze softened, the faintest hint of a smile tugging at his lips. He didn't need to say anything. The quiet between them had grown thick with understanding, unspoken yet present. Amelia ran her fingers over the first blank page, thinking of all the things she could write, small reflections, fleeting thoughts, even confessions she hadn't yet voiced. And in that stillness, she realized how rare these moments were, where silence carried so much meaning, and a simple presence could feel like a lifeline. Jordan shifted, breaking the spell just enough to make her aware of the room around them again. "You know," he began, his tone casual but layered, "sometimes we notice things about people only when we're willing to pay attention." Amelia nodded slowly, unsure how to respond without sounding overly cautious. His words echoed in her mind, layering themselves with everything he had said tonight. Every comment, every glance, every quiet gesture had combined to create a subtle awareness she couldn't ignore. The night pressed on, the shadows longer now, the wind outside making the curtains flutter gently. Amelia found herself drawn to the window, tracing the faint outlines of trees swaying in the dark. It was quiet in a way that felt almost sacred, the kind of quiet that allowed thoughts and emotions to breathe. "Amelia," Jordan said softly, breaking into her reverie. She turned to him, catching the slight tension in his shoulders, the almost imperceptible shift in his stance. "Do you ever feel like one small thing can change everything, even if it wasn't meant to?" She blinked, considering the question. Yes, she thought. Tonight had already proven that a single sentence, a simple note, or even a gift could redirect the course of an evening, and perhaps more. It was unsettling, yet it felt like an awakening of sorts, a recognition that life often moved in subtle currents we barely noticed. Amelia's gaze met his, and in that silent exchange, the room seemed to contract and expand all at once. She realized that something between them had undeniably shifted, though neither had directly acknowledged it yet. The air had grown thick with potential, with the quiet expectation of what could follow. Just as she thought she understood the rhythm of the moment, the phone rang sharply from the kitchen, slicing through the silence like a sudden ripple. Both of them froze, the tension hanging in the air, the sound intrusive yet strangely fitting. Amelia's hand trembled slightly as she reached for it, wondering whose voice on the other end would further alter the fragile balance of the evening. Amelia lifted the receiver with a sense of hesitation she couldn't quite shake. The line crackled softly, carrying a familiar warmth and yet an unfamiliar weight. "Hello," she said cautiously, her voice quieter than intended. "Amelia." "It's Claire," the voice replied, bright, lively, but with an undertone that made Amelia pause. "I just wanted to see if you were free. There's something I need your opinion on." Amelia glanced toward Jordan, who had moved closer to the couch but remained silent, watching her with that same quiet curiosity that had defined the evening. She nodded, more to herself than to him. "Sure, Claire. I can help. What's up?" The conversation continued, Claire explaining an issue that seemed trivial at first, some minor work dilemma, but Amelia found herself distracted. Her thoughts kept drifting back to Jordan, to the way he had noticed things about her tonight, the small shifts in air, the unspoken moments that felt heavier than the words themselves. As she ended the call, Amelia felt the weight of the silence settle in again. Jordan's gaze was steady, inviting, and somehow challenging. "Everything okay?" he asked gently, though the words sounded almost unnecessary. "Yes," she whispered, setting the phone down. "Just thinking." He leaned back slightly, the shadows of the room playing across his face. "Thinking about what?" he asked softly, almost hesitantly, as if aware that pressing too hard could break the fragile spell that had grown between them tonight. Amelia hesitated. How could she explain that his earlier comment had lingered in her mind longer than anything else? That a single sentence, one meant casually, had shifted her awareness of herself and, inexplicably, of him too. She swallowed and shook her head slightly. "Just life," she murmured. Jordan didn't push, but she noticed a faint smile curve his lips. He seemed to understand that sometimes the most meaningful exchanges were the ones left unsaid, the ones that hovered in the space between two people. Amelia felt her chest tighten, not with fear, but with recognition. She realized that the evening had transformed in ways she couldn't have predicted. Her hand reached for the journal again, fingers brushing over the leather, and she thought about the note inside, "Trust yourself more." She wondered if he knew how profoundly that had affected her. Perhaps not intentionally, she reasoned, but somehow, everything tonight had led to this quiet clarity, this recognition that small moments could hold enormous weight. Jordan shifted, breaking the stillness. "You know," he said softly, "sometimes it's the things we don't plan, the small, casual moments, that end up meaning the most." Amelia nodded, absorbing the words like a gentle echo of her own thoughts. The room had shifted again, even the air felt warmer, though the night outside was cold. She realized that every glance, every pause, every subtle gesture had accumulated into something delicate and almost palpable. A clock ticked in the background, each sound stretching longer than usual, marking time in a way that felt suspended. Amelia felt the urge to speak, to voice the awareness stirring in her chest, but the words tangled in her throat. She only managed a soft, almost imperceptible sigh. Jordan watched her for a long moment, then reached toward the coffee table and picked up the journal. "Do you mind if I?" he asked, nodding toward it. Amelia hesitated but then shook her head. "Go ahead," she said. He opened it carefully, flipping through the blank pages as if respecting the unspoken significance of the gift. "You know," he murmured, "sometimes I wish I could capture moments like these, not just for memory, but for understanding. How people truly feel, even when they don't say it." Amelia looked at him, struck by the sincerity in his voice. It was as if the entire evening had been a slow unfolding, each gesture and comment building toward this shared, quiet understanding. The subtle tension, the gentle shifts, the moments of reflection, they all formed a tapestry she hadn't expected to encounter tonight. She closed her eyes briefly, letting the calmness and warmth of the room settle over her. The soft glow of the lamp highlighted Jordan's features, the shadows playing across his expression, and she realized with a quiet shock how deeply aware she had become of him in this space. And then, almost imperceptibly, the journal slipped slightly from his fingers. Amelia reached instinctively to catch it, their hands brushing in a brief, fleeting touch that lingered longer than either had anticipated. The contact was gentle, almost accidental, but it carried the weight of unspoken acknowledgement, a quiet bridge connecting them in a way words could not. The room seemed to hold its breath. Amelia felt her pulse quicken, a subtle shift in her awareness of the evening and of Jordan. Everything ordinary about tonight had been transformed, small ripple by small ripple, into a delicate tension that hummed quietly between them. Before she could gather her thoughts, the sound of a distant doorbell rang out, slicing through the soft cocoon of their shared space. Both paused, startled, the timing perfect yet unsettling. Amelia realized that whatever else was going to unfold tonight, it would not remain contained within the living room alone. Amelia's heart still thumped from the unexpected doorbell. She glanced at Jordan, who was already on his feet, moving toward the front door with that familiar calmness that always contrasted the storm of her thoughts. For a moment, she watched him, noticing the way the lamplight highlighted his features, casting long, soft shadows across the floor. When he opened the door, there was no one standing there, only a small envelope resting on the mat. Amelia felt a flicker of curiosity as Jordan bent down to pick it up. He turned toward her, the envelope in hand, and she noticed the faint tension in his posture. Something in the night had shifted again, quietly, subtly, almost imperceptibly. Amelia stepped forward, drawn to him and the envelope both. "Who do you think it's from?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper, though her curiosity pressed insistently. Jordan shook his head, examining the handwriting on the front. "I don't know," he said softly, then handed it to her. The envelope was simple, unmarked, yet felt heavier than its size suggested. Amelia's fingers trembled slightly as she broke the seal and pulled out the note inside. The message was brief: "Sometimes noticing is the first step toward understanding." She blinked, startled. The words felt as though they had been meant for her and Jordan together, yet individually, each syllable carried a weight she couldn't quite name. She looked up at him, their eyes meeting in a quiet acknowledgement that whatever had begun tonight was not a fleeting moment, it was a subtle, lasting shift. Jordan leaned against the doorframe, watching her with that gentle curiosity that had become so familiar over the past hours. "It's funny," he said thoughtfully, "how one small comment can start a chain reaction. And how noticing something, someone, can change the way you see everything." Amelia nodded slowly, tucking the note carefully into the journal she had been holding all evening. Her fingers lingered on the leather cover, tracing the edge as if it were a tether to the calm, reflective clarity that had grown between them. She realized that the night, with its casual conversation, gentle teasing, and thoughtful gestures, had brought them closer, not in a romantic sense, but in a way that felt profound and quietly intimate. The wind outside whispered against the windows, rustling the curtains. Amelia felt a sense of gratitude wash over her, not for the gift, the note, or the moments themselves, but for the presence of someone who had noticed her, truly noticed her, and whose awareness had invited her to see herself differently. Jordan stepped closer, lowering his voice in a way that made her heart tighten slightly, not with anxiety, but with recognition. "Amelia, tonight every little thing, it's been different. And I think we both know it." She met his gaze and felt a gentle warmth spread through her chest. There was no need for exaggeration or dramatic declarations. This was quiet, unassuming, and yet meaningful. The tension, the small shifts, the notes, the gifts, they had all formed a thread connecting them, delicate but resilient. Amelia smiled softly, realizing that she had been holding her breath without even noticing. "Yes," she said, her voice calm and certain. "It has been different. And I'm glad." Jordan nodded, and the corners of his mouth lifted slightly, a quiet acknowledgement of understanding and connection. The room felt lighter now, yet richer with the subtle complexity of the night's moments. Everything ordinary had been transformed by noticing, by small gestures, and by the willingness to be present with one another. She returned to the couch, placing the journal on her lap. Jordan moved to stand beside her, glancing down at the journal. "Will you write in it?" he asked gently. Amelia nodded, opening the first blank page and letting her pen hover over it. She wrote slowly, thoughtfully, capturing not just the events of the evening, but the emotions, the shifts, the quiet revelations. Each word felt deliberate, a recognition of the small yet profound changes that had taken place. The night wore on, the world outside quiet and still. Stars blinked faintly in the distant sky, and the shadows inside the living room seemed softer, more forgiving. Amelia felt a sense of peace she hadn't anticipated, a warmth that came not from dramatic gestures, but from subtle awareness and shared understanding. Finally, she closed the journal, setting it gently on the table. She looked up at Jordan, feeling an unspoken connection that had grown throughout the evening, a bond built on noticing, on reflection, and on the quiet acknowledgement of one another. He smiled, and this time, there was no need for words. The night itself seemed to hold its breath, as if savoring the quiet resolution between them. Everything had changed, yet nothing had been forced. It was natural, tender, and profound in its simplicity. Amelia realized that some shifts, the ones that truly matter, don't arrive with fanfare. They come in quiet moments, small gestures, and thoughtful words that linger longer than we expect. And tonight, she had noticed and been noticed in a way that would stay with her, gently shaping the way she moved through the world. The room settled into complete stillness, the kind of calm that follows awareness. Amelia leaned back, exhaling slowly, her gaze resting on the closed journal. She smiled, knowing that even in ordinary evenings, life held the capacity for extraordinary quiet revelations. And for the first time that night, Amelia felt entirely at peace with the shift that had quietly, irrevocably changed the space between her and Jordan.